is slightly lower than the sort of ADSL that people have come to expect, the fixed broadband. So now 1.6 million HSPA. That offers data rates currently of perhaps 500 to a megabit to consumers that they experience. And that is very, very similar to what they experience on the fixed broadband, and that is what consumers want. The other thing that's very important to realise is that the spectrum needs to be harmonised. This is the band that was identified at the WRC, 790 to 862. The way handsets work now, the handsets market, is that there are a few big manufacturers and they make for very large markets. They won't make terminals, or they're not at very reasonable prices, for very small markets. This is why we've seen a number of countries have shifted position. For example, Ofcom is currently consulting, as Matthew mentioned, to align with Europe, and they calculated a benefit of 2 or 3 billion euros from having harmonisation. That, we think, is primarily due to lower costs of handsets as well as reduction of interference. But that is a major benefit. If you put an extra 2 or 3 billion euros on the cost of consumers in a country, that basically means that a lot fewer people will take up mobile broadband. And that's a decision that regulators need to do. And obviously they can only make decisions based on all the inputs and all the facts from everybody. Just a bit of background, I think this has been covered by others. But just to note, France, Switzerland, Sweden, Finland have opted for 798.62. Germany is allowing trials in this band. UK is consulting. Ireland recently commissioned a study. They had a workshop in October showing the benefits of allocating this sort of size of spectrum for mobile broadband, particularly for providing rural coverage. And we've spoken to a number of administrations, and they're very, very keen on considering this. But the difficulty is if some administrations don't adopt this band and maintain broadcasting television services, it's very difficult for their neighbours to deploy these services, as Eric Fournier showed a graph, a table of France. It makes it much easier if people use the same bands in terms of being able to use mobile broadband as widely as possible in a country. This is something I took off the internet. It's in Greek, so I assume this is to do with the TV allocations, the TV channels, which will be used for after digital switch off. There are a number of multiplexers. This is one I chose if you look at the bottom, you can see these are the channels. The ones I've circled are the channels that are within the CPT identified band. So it would be very difficult to use mobile broadband in Greece if this was replicated widely within Greece, because that's using up most of the channels. So to be able to use these frequencies for mobile broadband, to have low-cost terminals that can have mass market appeal, Greece needs to be able to ensure that somehow these bands are cleared. Now that won't be easy. There will be consumer costs. People will need to repoint their antennas. It's also a difficulty, but that's unfortunate in the way that the RRC planning agreement went forward in 2006. There was nothing on the agenda which allowed for a harmonised mobile broadband band, which was unfortunate, but there was no opportunity to do that. That would have been the ideal time to plan a band across Europe. So my conclusions. Access to harmonised spectrum in UHF is key to delivering, meeting the Lisbon targets and competing with fixed ADSL. Even in areas where there is fixed ADSL, competition will drive down prices and improve quality of service. And what UHF does is it provides another tool for which operators need to provide services. So operators need two sorts of spectrum. As was mentioned by Darko, they need spectrum for capacity in the higher bands, because there it's for city centres. You need larger slices of spectrum. There the range isn't such an issue. It's just a question of serving consumers in a city. But as you move outside of city centres, you need spectrum which is optimised for providing coverage. And this is where UHF really comes into its own. The higher frequency bands make it very, very expensive to provide rural coverage. So without these bands, I think that the upshot is that the breadth of coverage of broadband will be less in Greece than it could otherwise have been. We feel that a 20% allocation of this spectrum harmonised for mobile broadband does not significantly impair the deployment of broadcast digital TV services. We've seen, that there are compression techniques. Digital TV is 7-8 times more efficient than analog TV. We've seen in France, for example, they're hoping to offer 11 multiplexes and still make 798.62 available. 11 multiplexes is nearly 100 channels if we don't talk about HD. But even with HD, that still provides a sizable amount of spectrum. It's obviously important for economic growth, rural sustainability and jobs. Again, that's a very important issue in today's climate. It's becoming more important. There is a link between international competitiveness and broadband penetration. And this is because of the way people do business now. We have virtual companies. You can have an engineer in Greece, an accountant in the UK, a lawyer in the Philippines. And people need broadband to be able to do these virtual companies, to do business this way. So if Greece wants to stay competitive with its neighbours, then, as was rightly identified as a target by the EETT, I think, they need to try and boost mobile broadband penetration. But mobile is a way of supplementing what ADSL can offer, an alternative delivery platform which is of the interests of Greek consumers. So finally, I think that there's sufficient spectrum for both services. We're not talking about no digital TV via these analog channels. We're still talking about a large number of channels available for this. Obviously, a percentage will be lost if you allocate this 20%, but I think that the benefits brought by mobile broadband more than outweigh those negative impacts. But again, that's something for the Greek government in consultation with various government departments will need to make an analysis of. Thank you very much.